Dalton, Egremont, Florida, Great Barrington,
Pedro Pachano, delegate.
Malcolm Fick, alternate.
Hancock, Hinsdale. Keith is here. Keith Harrison, delegate, is present. Lanesboro,
Leanne Yinger, delegate.
Lee,
Buck Donovan, delegate.
Lenox, Monterey, Mount Washington, New Ashford, New Marlboro, North Adams, Otis, Peru, Pittsfield, Richmond, Sandusfield, Savoy, Sheffield,
I see that Sari Hoy, she's been having trouble, I think, getting in.
okay, yep. Stockbridge,
Christine Rasmussen, alternate.
Tyringham, Washington,
Don Gagnon, delegate.
West Stockbridge, Williamstown,
Roger Bolton, alternate.
and Corey let us know he was sorry not available today. Windsor,
Douglas McNally, delegate.
thank you.
Hey, thank you all. Thanks for coming during basketball games. The next order of business is to approve the minutes of January 18th, 2024. Can I hear a motion?
I move to approve the minutes.
Second. Second, Doug.
Thanks, Doug. Any comments or corrections? Okay, hearing none, we'll go to a roll call vote. Kate, please.
For expediency, I'm going to run through first names. Diana from Beckett. Oh, still trying to connect. Peter,
Yes.
Pedro,
Yes.
Keith, also trying to connect. Leanne,
Yes.
Buck,
Yes.
Sari. Alrighty.
She's writing in that she's having trouble unmuting and turning on her video.
All right.
Maybe she should try logging back in.
Yeah. Christine,
Yes.
Dawn,
Abstain.
and Doug.
Yes.
I'm sorry, and Roger.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody. The next order of business is a change in our agenda. Previously, we had an open item here for delegate and alternate comments and discussion. And it's been pointed out by a commission delegate that such an open-ended agenda topic violates open meeting law if it allows deliberation of topics that aren't specified in sufficient detail on the agenda. So starting this month, we've changed this item to be a discussion of anything that you might want to have considered for future agendas. By the way, if it's not brought up, if you don't bring it up, if you think about it in midweek or next month, please shoot a note off to myself or to Tom if you have any suggestions for items that might be included on the agenda. So if at this point, if any delegates and alternates have anything they would like to discuss that should be included on a future agenda, please speak now. Okay, thank you. The next item is comments from the public. We'll entertain comments from the public. If you have any comments, please state your name and town you're from. Okay. There are no comments from the public then. So the discussion of executive committee actions that were taken during the executive committee meetings on February 1st and March 7th of this year. The executive committee actions are outlined in the package. I don't want to go through all those one by one, but if anybody has any questions or would like any discussion of any of those items, please speak now. Okay, then we'll move on to the next order of business. The BRPC appoints members as kind of a county organization, the remains of a county organization. BRPC appoints members to the Berkshire County Regional Housing Authority. They have requested that we reappoint 2 members to 3-year terms to the Board of Commissioners. That it would be Jay Sacchetti and Lisa Sloan. Do I have a motion for that?
So moved. Doug?
Thank you, Doug.
Second.
Thanks, Roger.
Just a note.
A motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
Just a note that I've mentioned several times before. We're the last person standing as far as a countywide organization, and we should recognize that.
Yeah, this is another one of those things that kind of falls through the cracks and falls in our lap. So this is fine. But any other discussion or questions?
Well, when this was first brought up several years ago, it was quite a quandary for the Berkshire County Regional Housing Authority because it was supposed to be a county appointee, and so they had to figure out how to get it so that we could do it. But I think they've straightened that out. So we've done it a few times, a few cycles now.
It's all above board and copacetic.
Doug, I thought the sheriff was the last person standing
Oh,
in this respect.
Sheriff's appointment. Well, we'll go through with it. Okay. Any further discussion? Any questions? And we'll proceed to a roll call vote, please.
okay. Again, I'm doing first names by town alphabetically. Diana from Beckett. Still trying to connect. Peter.
Yes.
Pedro.
Aye.
Keith. Got your thumbs up. Leanne.
Yes.
Buck.
Yes.
If I miss your town, we'll come back to you. Sorry.
Yes.
Christine.
Yes.
Dawn.
Yes.
Roger.
Yes.
Doug.
Yes.
Did anybody join the meeting who I've missed? All right. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. That motion passed. And now we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is a presentation on the discussion of the Mass Leads, which Mass Leads an act relative to strengthening Massachusetts economic leadership, also referred to as the Economic Development Bond Bill. The last BRPC meeting, we had a presentation on the Economic Development Plan, Team Massachusetts Leading Future Generations. And tonight we have Rory O'Hanlon with us, who is the executive from the Executive Office of Economic Development, to explain proposed legislation that would implement this plan. Mr. O'Hanlon, will you want to take the floor?
Thanks, Malcolm, and thank you, Tom, for the invitation to be here and be with you all. Appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate your interest, and I think there's going to be some mutual interest here. So I have a slide deck, and I'll try to go through it quickly. But Tom, Malcolm, if I'm not going fast enough, just shout and tell me to keep it moving.
No, as I mentioned in my
ahead of time, so we're
as I mentioned in my email, Rory, we might be a little early. So I'm glad you could join us earlier.
Yeah, no, it worked out. Happy to be here. So I'm going to share my screen now.
If I just might remind people that you might want to put it on speaker view, you'll see Rory a little bit better.
Yeah, and I will also make sure I can leave a copy with Tom, so that you guys all have it as a reference too. Hopefully that's full screen for everyone.
Yes, looks good.
Awesome. So as Malcolm acknowledged, last year we did a planning process around the state, and that fed into this economic development bill, which Governor Healy filed earlier this month. So I'm going to run through some background and jump into some of the details, and then I certainly want to leave time for discussion and questions and get your feedback as well. So here's just the agenda. I'll jump into the background. So as you know, you might have heard this from Ann Goby when she was on with you recently. Ann's a colleague of mine in the Executive Office of Economic Development. Last year, we did this planning process, which is required by law. We did a statewide effort where we had meetings every region of the state. We were out at the BIC. The BIC was so kind to host us in Pittsfield. But we had 9 different regional meetings. We had over 1,300 residents participate in the process. We had some sector-specific deep dives with organizations and businesses and other stakeholders involved in that process. And ultimately, what we landed on is this framework that's displayed on this slide. I think you've all seen the plan, so I won't dwell on it too much, but the plan is sort of centered around this overall vision that we want Massachusetts to be the best place for talent and for businesses. And we have these guiding principles of equity, affordability, and competitiveness across all regions, across all humans. That's sort of centered from Governor Healy and Lieutenant Governor Driscoll as imperatives that we keep in mind in everything we do. So the plan is based around three priority areas. The first is fundamentals, the idea that we need to make sure we're investing in supporting some of the foundational things that any successful economy needs. And we learned, even though we're just the Executive Office of Economic Development, it became pretty clear that in order for Massachusetts to be successful, we need to address the housing and transportation challenges. We heard that loud and clear when we were in the Berkshires. We heard that in every other region that we were in. There's some nuances to the type of housing challenges and transportation challenges that are facing certain regions. But at the end of the day, it's the price of housing, it's the supply of housing, it's the aging housing stock. So we work very closely with the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities on that, and we were at one time merged as one secretariat. So I've spent some time on housing stuff over the years, as well as transportation. Obviously, is an area where the state needs to continue to invest. The second priority area, which is more back to traditional economic development for us in the fundamentals bucket, is investing in infrastructure and competitiveness. We have a number of programs, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with just from your planning expertise and the work you do on behalf of the 32 communities that you represent. But we have programs like the MassWorks Infrastructure Program. We have the Community One Stop for Growth, which is our sort of our key initiative for delivering grants to communities across the state. So we plan to continue to invest in infrastructure and also in ways where we can support our competitors in areas like broadband and permitting, and things like that. Talent, second priority area. Obviously, I think the Massachusetts success is largely due to its people. We have incredibly talented people doing a wide array of things in different industries and sectors. And so forward to our strategies, doing what we can to retain and attract the world's best talent across all backgrounds. there's two components to this priority area. The first is be the global talent magnet. We're incredibly fortunate to have so many incredible colleges and universities across the state that bring in 500,000 college kids and graduate students each year. So core to that is, how can we make sure that those college students stay here and start to build a career and plant the roots here. But also, in addition to the college kids, we're also thinking about ways where we can support pathways into the trades, into in-demand industries. And it's become very evident that a college degree isn't really needed for a lot of really strong jobs. We've also spent some time thinking about the immigrant workforce. Immigrants have been so core to Massachusetts' success over the last many decades. And as we have an aging population and a shrinking labor force overall, we need to think about ways where we can create pathways for immigrants in the state. The other component here is you won't see it super reflected in the bill, but tell our story. We've learned that there's a lot of great things happening in the state, across the state, and we need to do a better job telling our story. If we don't tell it, who will? So we've been thinking about ways where we can promote Massachusetts, tell our story, and tell shine light on a lot of the good things that are happening here. We spend a lot of time, as my boss would say, talking about all the things that are going wrong. We sometimes forget to highlight the things that are going well. So that's part of our strategy here, to make sure that people see the value and see all the good that's happening in Massachusetts. The last priority area here, before I flip to the next slide, is sectors. This is really about supporting the businesses that power the state's economy. So we've call out a few key sectors here that we are put in the length and lead area, where we think we're global leaders: life sciences and healthcare, but also advanced manufacturing and robotics. Some people may not be aware, but we have a really robust robotics cluster in the state. And obviously, we have a proud tradition of manufacturing that stretches across the state into the Berkshires. And we do really well on cutting edge advanced manufacturing. How do we continue to push the lead there? And AI, I'll talk about in a little bit, but obviously artificial intelligence has burst onto the scene. It's something we need to think about. We also called out some areas where we think we can do a better job of catalyzing or building new leadership. There's two areas in particular. One is climate tech, where we think there's a tremendous opportunity for the state to lean into that. Obviously, we're doing a lot in response to climate change, but there's a lot we can do in terms of leveraging as an economic tool. And then tourism and culture and the creative economy. We think that this we can do. There's a lot of good things happening in the creative economy and tourism sectors, but we think the state can be a better partner and find ways to push those industries. It supports a lot of small businesses and also brings in a lot of revenue for the state. Finally, the third leg of this stool, if you will, is making things easier for businesses. Some of the feedback we had gotten through the planning process is like, gee, you have all these programs and it's great, but it's like, for someone who's running a small business, it's very hard to navigate state government. You have to call this person, you have to maybe email this person and wait for a response. So we're thinking about ways where we can streamline that. And we're working on this portal, which we're calling the business front door, but basically it's a streamlined portal where a business will come in, ask a few questions, we'll give them feedback and get them on their way, and obviously get them the help they need so they can get back to their day job and growing and supporting their business. So that's our plan. I just wanted to call that out because it's sort of our North Star for the overall bill. And as we thought about, how do you start that? Your plan is only as good as its execution. So we thought about what are the tools or resources we have in terms of executing the plan. So we have 5 levers that we identified that we've view as, how do we actually make this plan a reality? So one is convening. We have the ability to bring people together. Opportunities like this. Thank you again, Tom. Talking to people like you all about ways where we can support the state. We have resources. We work closely with the legislature to allocate and appropriate funds. And we have different economic development incentive and grant programs. We need to use those wisely and obviously make sure we are getting the taxpayer bang for their buck. Regulation of laws. Obviously, the legislature passes laws. We help administer and implement them. We also have the ability to issue regulations. That is something we need to be mindful of. It can be good and bad, obviously. So we need to make sure we're using that the right way. a customer. Obviously, the government has to buy product, it has to procure services. We want to make sure we're cognizant of that we are a customer in a lot of ways, and that's also a tool to support businesses and support residents across the state. Finally, message to communicate. Particularly Governor Healy, Lieutenant Governor Driscoll, my boss, Secretary Howe, are very effective communicators, and I think using that platform to convey good and convey a vision is super important. So these are the levers we thought about as we started to set out, and obviously funding and policy are sort of the key components within the bill. So cut to the chase here. March 1st, Governor Healy filed the Mass Leads Act, as Malcolm introduced. It's a $3.5 billion bill, 2.8 of which is capital authorization, meaning it's money that will be we will be using bond this Commonwealth's credit to pay for it over the next several years. It's not cash; it's going to be financed. We also have $750 million in changes to tax programs, so that's changing the statutory cap on different things. And then we have 161 outside sections that pertain to policy. And the bill is currently pending before the Joint Committee on Economic Development. It was referred there on March 11th. So I'm going to jump in now to the bill's components. So just as a reminder, sort of the three priority areas where you think about fundamentals, talent, and sectors. I'm going to use that as sort of the guiding compass for this presentation. So the first one is fundamentals. Again, investing in the fundamentals to support economic growth, like things like the one-stop. So this aspect of the bill is about $1 billion, and it supports a variety of programs which you may be familiar with. I'll call out a few. MassWorks. There's a $400 million reauthorization of MassWorks. It's an existing program. It's been around since 2012. It's probably it's our biggest grant program in terms of economic development. We invest in infrastructure that leverages private development, jobs, commercial development, as well as housing. And the program is part of the One Stop, which you may be familiar with. I also want to call it the Rural Development Fund, which we've included for $100 million. And the goal is to expand and grow that program. That program is designed to support rural communities around the state, and things similar to how I described MassWorks, helping rural communities with local economic development initiatives. And as hopefully you all know by now, supporting rural communities is a big priority for the Healy-Driscoll administration. And we think that this piece of the bill is going to allow us to do that much more. We also have programs in here for coastal communities, as well as how do we revive or revitalize underutilized properties or contaminated properties like brownfields. So reauthorizing existing programs. Several of these are available through the One Stop, which, as a reminder, the expression of interest process is ongoing right now. That application window will open in May, and is obviously a tremendous opportunity for the 32 different communities that make up your organization to apply for things that they need to do and achieve, and I'm sure seeking your counsel on. There's a couple of policy provisions that I'll fly through quickly. The rural designation, the bill formally codifies the definition of rural and small towns. There's 181 towns and cities that meet that definition. And this is putting into law to provide some long-term predictability and show the state's commitment to elevating those communities across the state. Permitting, we have a handful of different provisions in the bill with respect to permitting, some of which is making adjustments to how we manage permitting in our office, as well as some accommodations to some of the challenges we're seeing right now in the real estate industry. So I want to call it that. I know it's top of mind for a lot of builders and developers across the state. Broadband, we're fortunate. We have nearly $400 million in broadband, federal broadband funds that we're in the process of deploying. This bill doesn't touch the federal funds, obviously, but it does have a policy provision in here that would allow our local housing authorities and some other governmental bodies to procure services much more easily. Right now, we've learned that housing authorities have to go through several different procurements. They have to do some for design, some for installation, and it ends up taking time and money. So we're proposing to streamline that so that it can be done more quickly and therefore allow us to deploy the federal funds more in a more expeditious manner. And I know many of you are probably super familiar with the last mile effort. The federal funds are hoping to build on that and can be applied statewide. Devens, no, not in the Berkshires, but Devens is a unique asset the state has. We're proposing to make some changes to their housing and commercial caps out there, with the idea we can maybe create a platform for future development in that part of central Massachusetts. Switching to talent, talent, we have one provision in here. It actually doesn't pertain to my office, but it supports the Massachusetts Educational Finance Agency, which does work with students and families around support with tuition. I will call out that in addition to this bill, we have a pending budget proposal with the legislature, and there's some resources in there to support our talent strategy in that vehicle as well. I won't talk about that tonight, but I just want to call out that we do have a couple of different legislative vehicles floating around. Tonight, I'm just speaking about the economic development bill. One of our proposals in here is a new statewide internship pilot program. We have different internship programs that we run currently through some of our quasis. We have quasi-public agencies that specialize in economic development. You may be familiar with some of them: the Massachusetts Life Science Center, Massachusetts Technology Collaborative, the Mass Clean Energy Center. And they all sort of focus in certain areas. Life sciences, obviously, they're working with biotech and biomanufacturing companies. Mass Tech is often working with early stage technology companies. And the Mass Clean Energy Center does a lot of work with clean tech and climate tech companies. The idea with this internship program, we got a lot of feedback around how well internships can be in terms of getting a young person to plant his or her or their roots here and start to build a future. So we proposed a tax credit program that would incent companies. We have some language in the bill that would require them to prove that they're going above and beyond what they've done historically, so that we're not rewarding companies for stuff they're already doing. This would be an incentive to go above and beyond, but to create more opportunity for young people to intern either for a summer or for other parts of the year if that college student has time, and get familiar with an industry in which they're studying. So you can see the criteria here would be an incentive of up to of $5,000 or 50% of wages paid per intern. We'd cap it at $100,000 for employers, and it would be a $10 million per year pilot program if it were to go into effect. We also have some policy provisions that I want to call out. The first of which is for, as part of our talent strategy, foreign trained physicians. We have obviously we have the challenges with our health and human services workforce, and particularly with physicians, especially primary care physicians. So this is a proposal that has a lot of consensus, creates a pathway for a foreign trade physician, may have become a doctor in a different part of the world, but has the qualifications. They'd have to show they're qualified, but if they are able to clear that criteria, they would be able to practice medicine in Massachusetts with some conditions. They'd have to have a mentor. They'd have to obviously get approval from the appropriate board. But then if they were to get their license, they'd be conditioned on them providing or practicing in areas that are underserved. So the idea here is that we could get doctors to areas where there are shortages in places like Western Mass, Southeastern Mass. So we think it's not going to solve all problems, but it can help. And also is a talent retention and attraction tool. Workforce training, there's some resources we have in the workforce. It's called the Workforce Investment Trust Fund. It gets resources from sports betting revenue, and tremendous resource to have at this time, particularly when there's we're monitoring revenue collections each month. But we're proposing some changes, hoping the legislature will support it, that would allow us to use these resources to support different training programs and workforce development programs for residents around the state. Nonprofit boards, very small provision, but there's an issue that was brought to our attention. So we include a provision that would allow nonprofit board members to receive a stipend up to $500 without losing their personal civil liability protection. The idea here is that particularly some small nonprofits, you know, this issue could be enough to like encourage someone maybe to participate and support a nonprofit board that might not otherwise. So the Massachusetts Nonprofit Network is a strong supporter of that provision. So I'll move on to the final bucket, and let me check with. Hopefully, I'm doing okay on time, Tom. Sectors. So there's a couple components to our sector strategy. The first one is climate tech, which I made reference to at the outset. This is an area where we identified that there's a tremendous opportunity for Massachusetts to lead in the space. Again, we're doing a lot to respond to the climate crisis, but we think there's a huge upside in terms of economic development. We have so much innovation here happening in the state. We could be part of developing the technologies and creating some of the innovation that we need in the marketplace to get serious about the climate by making targeted investments into our ecosystem. And I think this is something that, can have tremendous upside for the Berkshires as well. I know, the Berkshire Innovation Center has spent some time. They've got some startup companies that are in this space. So we're excited about it. So this is built on the original life science proposal from Governor Patrick back in 2008. You may be familiar with it. So modeled on that, Governor Healey's proposed $1 billion over 10 years to support climate tech. And there's sort of three legs to the stool. The first is around capital. So using bond dollars to make capital investments in areas like R&D, in manufacturing, in ways to support commercialization of climate technologies across the state. A portion of that money is also going to be set aside for supporting offshore wind. Obviously, we have a tremendous resource with the Atlantic off our coast, and we want to lean into that space. Tax incentives. So there's $300 million set aside for creating a new tax incentive framework, which would support climate tech companies. When we look out across the country and we see that states like California, New York, Colorado, just to name a few, that are really leaning into this space, as well as all the federal funds that are floating around out there. I think it's important for Massachusetts to have some what we think are responsible set of incentives that we can use to support, attract, and retain climate tech companies, particularly those that are early stage as they grow out of a Berkshire Innovation Center or they grow out of a university. We want them to stay here, and we think having some incentives can go a long way in that strategy. The third leg of the stool is operating. So this is actually not in the bill. It's tied to the budget process. But this year, Governor Healey proposed $30 million for the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. The Massachusetts Clean Energy Center is a quasi public agency. They'll be charged with administering this initiative. And so we've budgeted doing that for the next 10 years, which is how we get the $300 million. So we think this is a bold initiative, but also an initiative I think is makes a lot of sense for the state, and I think we're optimistic could really generate a strong return for Massachusetts and really allow us to become a leader. We're a leader in a lot of ways in this space. By investing in it, we think we can emerge that much stronger and grow a new cluster across Massachusetts. The next component, another big chunk of the bill, is still in sectors, is life sciences. So the Governor Healey is proposing to extend life sciences initiative for another 10 years. So it would be another $1 billion over the next 10 years to support the Massachusetts Life Science Center and their mission. So a big chunk of that, $500 million, is for capital. So making investments in equipment, lab space, and the like across the state. I will call out we're working with the Mass Life Science Center to sort of change our approach in terms of we want to be bold and we want to be ambitious. We're the global epicenter for life sciences. And so we're really leaning into ways we can do more cross-sector collaboration. How can we bring the healthcare system? How can we bring hospitals? How can we bring community health providers into the fold? How can we do more medical technology? And we think that there's real upside there. We were fortunate to win President Biden's launched his ARPA-H initiative a couple of years ago. Massachusetts won one of his hubs, the Investor Catalyst Hub, which is sort of a reinforces that we do view ourselves, that the world views it, and the country views it as a leader in the space. And so we think we need to continue to lean into this. And I want to call out that health equity is something we're really thinking about with this vision. There's a lot of tremendous things happening in Cambridge and in other areas of the state, but we want to make sure that also we're seeing the benefits to our residents. There's a lot of disparities across Massachusetts, both on a regional level, but on a demographic level as well. And so we're really planning to elevate health equity and find ways to support our residents in stronger ways through this vision. This also includes expanding and extending incentives, similar to what I said in climate tech. States like Texas, California, New York, Pennsylvania, Indiana, New Jersey are hyper competitive in the space, and so we want to continue to be prepared for business development engagement and ways to support life science, biotech, medical technology companies, and their decisions to stay and grow here in Massachusetts. It also includes some, again, not in this bill, but we also budget for operating resources over the next 10 years to support things that we can't do with capital or tax incentives. So that's the two big initiatives you're probably hearing about: climate tech and life sciences. So I've just covered those in the last two slides. I'm going to go through those last couple slides pretty quickly, Tom, so I'll be mindful of time. So there's a lot on this slide. I'll try to I'll call out the key pieces, but this bill also includes a lot of support for the innovation economy. And so it includes $99 million for advanced manufacturing resources, so supporting higher ed institutions and manufacturing companies with targeted investments into that ecosystem. R&D matching grant fund. We have done a lot of great work with the University of Massachusetts system and other higher ed institutions in terms of leveraging some of the research that they're doing and helping support it be commercialized and be an economic driver. The Small Business Technical Grants Program is run by our quasi called Mass Ventures. They support early stage companies. Some of our new programs I want to spotlight quickly, the Applied AI Hub. As I mentioned early on, AI has been around for quite some time, but it has really burst onto the scene in the last 12 months, and we want to anticipate what it might mean for our key sectors, and so we're looking to lean into it in ways where we can use AI to be applied to our key sectors and help grow our economy. It's one of these things where if we don't get into the game, we're gonna regret it, and so we're working on an AI strategic task force at the moment, which is going to help inform some of our policy decisions going forward. Massachusetts Tech Hub idea is inspired by the federal government. Actually, they have the U.S. EDA has a Tech Hub program. Massachusetts competed for that. A couple of proposals didn't make it. There's still one alive down in the southeast, but we want to leverage that same idea to support some great ideas that have burst on the scene. Springfield, for example, spent a lot of time working on ways they can elevate themselves around quantum computing, which is going to be important for the future. Worcester has done a lot of work on industrial biomanufacturing, and I know this is something that I'm sure the BIC and One Berkshire and others are following in your region. So we think this is an area of leveraging consortia to elevate the state's in key technology areas, but also we want to focus on areas outside of Boston, in areas like Worcester, Springfield, Pittsfield, Fall River, New Bedford. Robotics, as I mentioned, we're one of the leaders in robotics. On a per capita basis, we attract the most VC dollars in the country. So there's tremendous upside there. Robotics is really becoming a horizontal where it's being used across several different industries. We want to continue to keep our foot on the gas there. Our Business Builds program is a new idea to help support businesses and their decisions as they make whether they decide to grow, expand, or locate their businesses. EDIP is one of our biggest or one of our strongest economic development incentive tools. We've proposed some changes to right size it so that it can be used more effectively, particularly with early stage companies. Like I said before, there's some states that are really being super aggressive with mega economic development deals. Ohio, New York, Arizona, Texas, Georgia, they've all been super aggressive with massive economic development incentive deals. That's not the game we're in, but we do want to be smart and leverage what we do have. This program is about $25 to $30 million a year. We want to make some adjustments so it can be more effective and right sized for 2024. The matching R&D fund is just an adjustment to make sure that our public state schools can compete fairly for this program the same way some of our private schools are. So we're making a slight adjustment for how the matching equation is done for state funds. Small businesses, obviously super important to the state. They're make up about 98% of our businesses and employ more than 40% of the state's workforce. So we propose some tools in here to support as part of our, post-COVID, we want to, figure out what is a sustainable strategy to support small businesses. So we seek to leverage community development financial institutions, as well as some matching funds for small business. Business Empower is a program run by Mass Growth Capital Corporation. You may be familiar with them. They had run the small business grant program during the pandemic. And then I won't go through the next three here, but
he's in already, isn't he? I let him in before.
I won't go through these last three bullets here in detail, but I just want to call out, we have some relief in here for workers' comp for a certain cohort of self-insured business groups. We also are incorporating a definition for micro businesses because we understand that small businesses aren't the same. And so we want to have a more elevated focus on businesses with 10 or fewer employees. And then it's an ongoing project. We're working on ways to improve access for minority-owned construction firms in public construction. Tourism and the creative economy, as I called out at the start, we want to elevate this as a economic development strategy for the state. So we have several reauthorizations for existing programs to support tourism assets and cultural facilities. We've also proposed live theater tax credit to support regional live theater productions. Again, this is from a competitive standpoint. Neighboring states like Rhode Island, as well as other areas like Illinois and Louisiana, have been aggressive in the space, and we think there's an opportunity to level the playing field with a modest tax credit. The governor also announced, you may have seen this, some additional actions alongside the bill. One, she's in the process of setting up an advisory committee on cultural policy development that we would work on in consultation with the Mass Cultural Council. And she's also announced a desire to name an artist in resident and a poet laureate, again, to support the creative economy. And then finally, just to close the loop on the whole bill, you're getting the full rundown here. Within my office, so I work for the Executive Office of Economic Development. We also have the Office of Consumer Affairs and Business Regulations. So consumer protection is something we also think about. So there's two provisions in the bill. One around EV charging, just to make sure there's a lot more electric vehicles on the road. We want to make sure that charging stations, particularly public charging stations, are being tracked, being tested. We can make sure they're reliable and they're working. And then we're making some adjustments to a law that's been around for quite some time, but there's a home improvement contractor program, which is to protect consumers and also, make sure contractors are being held accountable for smaller home projects, making some updates just to make sure that's right size for the present day. So thank you for bearing with me. That was a 111-page bill in about 18 slides there. So I appreciate it. I'm going to pull this down now and then happy to have a discussion.
Well, thank you, Roy. I see why you were concerned about time. There's a lot of meat in there. But I think Doug has his hand up for the first question. So, and then we'll
I'll take
the questions after that.
Thank you. Just a couple of points. Thank you for the presentation. You talked about adjusting regulations so that physicians, coming from overseas could be fast-tracked to be able to get certified. I would suggest that there are many other areas in education and technology where we know from the Berkshire Immigrant Center that we get people with PhDs from overseas who can't get certified in the States. So I think we might want to look further than just physicians. On internships, the internships for college students is great, particularly for the foreign students in our universities who get those internships and get hooked up so they stay here. But we don't want to forget the necessity of funding internships at the high school level. We have a connecting activities program across the state. It's very strong in Berkshire County, but every year there's a threat that that's not going to be certified, refunded. So that's don't forget that for rural communities, hooking the students up in an internship early makes them realize what employment opportunities are in their area so that they don't flee the rural areas. And the final thing I have is on the charging stations. In Berkshire County, most of the charging stations are level 2, which is useless for anybody who needs a quick charge. We need to really fast track the level 3 chargers.
Thanks, Doug. Very helpful feedback.
Thank you, Doug. Christine, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. That was very informative. As part of the Rural Issues Committee that BRPC has, we have spent a lot of time looking at a real problem for small towns, and that is getting employees to assume the jobs that have been filled for years and years by people who have done a marvelous job but are now getting to retirement age. And so as you're talking about all of these internships, maybe also look at government service as one that could be very valuable to keeping small towns viable. And then just another quick point is that all these grants sound wonderful, but we don't have a grant writer in our town, and many other small communities don't. And so I really hope there's some thought given to have the regional planning agencies be funded at a level where they can help towns develop grants and go through the entire system. Because I think without that, rural towns are still going to be falling to the bottom of the pot.
Thanks, Christine. Very helpful feedback.
Thanks, Christine. Any other questions or comments? Laura?
Thank you. Sorry. Hi, Rory. I'm Laura Brennan with Berkshire Regional Planning Commission. Thank you so much for this. Every time I learn more about the bill through one of the presentations, it's definitely helpful. I wanted to ask about one of the emerging or priority sectors that you've got amongst this mix, and that's tourism, arts and culture specifically. When I combine that with the emphasis on rural, for us, that's leaving out a whole segment of tourism, and that's outdoor recreation. The specific programs that are reauthorized here are really geared toward renovation, restoration, construction of facilities, both the MCC's Cultural Facilities Fund and then the Destination Development Fund under MOT. And that leaves out the kinds of work that we would want to do to promote outdoor recreation as a really major part of our tourism sector. So I'm wondering if there are places in the bill that I'm not seeing outdoor recreation that I need to hone in on, or if perhaps that's an area that's going to be invested in through another vehicle, because you did specifically say that there are other vehicles out there focusing on adjacent issues.
Yeah, it's a great question, Laura. We I will say for the tourism asset, which I can tell you're familiar with it, the Destination Development Grants or the Tourism Asset Program, we did intentionally include a reference to, we use the terminology acro-tourism in the line item to expand the aperture of the program so that we could do things like support outdoor recreation. So I will say that small provision, but we did include an additional proviso to so that program can be expanded more than it presently is. So that is in there. In the annual operating budget exercise, we are hoping to get additional money for the Tourism Trust Fund. I will say that largely is, that goes to regional tourism councils, as well as to the to our office, the Mass Office of Travel and Tourism, to do sort of more promotional things. So it doesn't square exactly with what you said. And the last point I would say is our friends at the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs have now launched. They have a point person in outdoor recreation with whom we're starting to have a dialogue with to figure this out. And I know when we had the regional listening session in Pittsfield, there was a number of stakeholders that are running businesses in that industry or adjacent businesses that benefit from people who are coming out for activities like rafting or hiking or climbing. And so we definitely recognize that is a growing opportunity for the region and something we'll continue to think about.
Thank you.
Great. Are there any other questions? Yeah, Tom.
Malcolm, I just would like to figure out the process of what's next with this bill. Rory, if you could tell us the process and if there was a hearing date yet that had been established, or how is this? The legislative process sometimes is a little bit mysterious. I wondered if you could help us sort through that a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. It's a good question. So the bill has been formally referred to the Joint Committee on Economic Development and Emerging Technologies. It's chaired by, on the House side, Jerry Parasella, who hails from Beverly, and then on the Senate side, Barry Feingold, who hails from Andover. Those committees are made up of 20 different legislators. I can't recall them all off the top of my head, but I imagine there's certainly some from your neck of the woods. There isn't yet a hearing date, Tom, to answer your question. We are anticipating that will hopefully be named or announced in the coming weeks. The bill technically, the committee needs to either act on it or get an extension order within 30 days of receiving it. So we're waiting to see what they do there, and hopefully there'll be a hearing announced sooner. Sooner than later, and we have a really good relationship with the chairs of the committee. We're having a dialogue with them as well as legislators around the state. I know my boss Yvonne Howe is meeting with probably Bouvier soon, and we're also meeting with Barrett soon as well. So we're having a continuing dialogue with different legislative offices, and then so once the committee will have a hearing. They will then act on it, and the bill will eventually make its way through the House and through the Senate, hopefully to a conference committee, and then back to the governor's desk. And we anticipate typically, at least history would say, the economic development bill is one of the last bills that the legislature does before their break at the end of formal session. So it probably will be end of July when this bill makes its way, hopefully back to the governor's desk.
Okay, thank you. That was very helpful. And I think, if there are people interested in various aspects of the bill, supporting it when it comes to get a committee date would be, I think, a very good idea.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I'll put my email in the chat, and I'll also email you a copy of the deck just so you have it for your membership here.
Perfect. Any other questions for Rory? Well, Rory, thank you very much. We still have 4 minutes.
Made up for lost time there, I guess. Thank you all. I really appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate your interest in this and the partnership, and hope to talk to you again soon.
Yeah, thanks
Thank you
for
very much. Okay, the next item on their agenda is a presentation of Eversource's electric sector modernization plan. We've been talking about electric transmission and distribution systems in relation to the state's plans for some time, and this is a great opportunity to hear representatives of Eversource describing the solar sector modernization plan. We have with us several representatives from Eversource. Mike he's Vetavelli.
Give it a shot. Give it a shot. Let me see how good you are.
Okay, Vetavelli.
Vitavelli. Hard
Okay,
V, but no
Vitavelli.
problem.
Okay.
No problem. We're past
That's
St. Patrick's Day, so we're all good. Again, thank you to the Berkshire Regional Planning Agency for inviting us to this. We did a kind of a general presentation last month to the executive directors of all the regional planning agencies in Boston, and it was a very good dialogue. And we encouraged the regional planning agencies to, if they wanted kind of a sectional regional presentation, we'd be happy to do that. So I have an all-star team with me today that can really go into detail with it. I did share the presentation earlier. Is that something that I shared it with Tom? Are you able to pull that up, Tom, and work the slides?
Yeah, Laura from my office is going to do that. She's
awesome.
Good.
Great. So let me just kick it off. Let me just kind of introduce my team here that we have. So with us today, we have Jacob Lucas, who's the Director of Transmission System Planning. He'll be presenting. Juan Martinez, who's the Manager of System Planning on the distribution side. He'll be the first presenter. And then we also have Aaron Engstrom, who's the Director of Regulatory Affairs. But also we have two other key players as well. We have Amy Henderson from my community relations team, and she handles the Berkshire County region for community relations. And then we have Chris Comack, who's an engineer in Juan's group. So with that, I know we have a lot of great information, and I'd like to get it right into the slides, and we'll start off with Juan. So Juan?
Yep, I'll take it over. Can you hear me correctly first?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, let me see. We're in the first slide. Okay, good. Yeah, so I'll start it off. We can start with the agenda. That's fine. That's the next slide. And while I'll cover the electric sector modernization plan, we modify the slides to cover a little bit more of Western Mass part on this presentation. Jacob is going to come up and cover the transmission upgrades after that. Okay, so next slide. Next slide. Okay, so just a little bit of background, right? So the electric sector modernization plan was already submitted to the department under DPU 2410. And basically it's a long-term plan, 5, 10 years and 2050. And what we've shown basically is all the infrastructure that's required to meet the state goals. And this is all driven by the state goals, the greenhouse gas emission goals by the state, reduce carbon emissions by at least 85% by 2050. So it's 30% by 2025, 50% by 2030, and by 2050, the 85%. And the electric sector modernization plan is the utilities plan on how to get there, basically. So that's what you'll see now. And we most of the plan you'll see both at the substation and at the transmission level. But I'll start with the low level, the substation, right? This overall map is a good slide to show what's in the system now. So I'll focus on the Western Mass. So, but it's good to have a reference, right, in our service territory on how the different systems are aligned. And we also show the EJ communities numbers per the service territory. But in Western Mass, basically, if we take the Western Mass system, which is everything that's highlighted, we have about 26 what we call bulk distribution stations. If you combine all the stations, the firm capacity is about 1.3 gigawatts of firm capacity, about 117,000 EJ customers. And then if you take each one of those substations, the average substation headroom is about 17 MVA. And most stations vary from, let's say 20 MVA to all the way to 75, 150 MVA. So that's kind of the range of substations capacity. And as you know, the Western Mass is more, it's not as low dense as, let's say, the city of Boston. So you can see the difference, right? In Metro Boston, there's 21 substations. But even though there's 21, the firm capacity of those stations are 3 gigawatts. So it's almost 3 times with less substation. Why? They're bigger, right? They're a lot bigger in order to supply more dense load, basically. So this gives a good breakdown of the system. Next slide. And as mentioned before, so the driver is the greenhouse gas emissions, right? And the plan for the state to get there, right, is take everything that emits gas now, so and convert it to electric, basically. So you can think of it as you're heating right now, going from, let's say, gas or other sources to electric. Your electric vehicles going from gas to electric, and you go down that route, and that's basically how the state goals get there, right? If you look at this slide, this is our breakdown at a system level. Still, I'm still showing system level numbers, but this is how the system will look in the next, 2035, 2040, 45, 50. And this chart breaks down into 2. If you can think of it, the left side, where you have 2028, 2033, and the right side, the 2035 after. And what you see here is clearly, from now until 2033, we still plan for kind of a summer peaking system, and you can see it there. So gigawatts is about close to 7 gigawatts. This is at the substation level for the entire system. And you can see how starting in 2035 now, the chart is changing. So a lot of the heating, which is the kind of the blue color, a lot of the transportation starts to get bigger, and all the electric others are the same, but you see how a lot of the chunk of the growth now is heating. So you can think of the system starting in 2035 to convert from a summer peaking to a winter peaking system. And we're talking an increase, it's all the way at the top, but you're talking a 20% increase in demand by 2033 and about 150% by 2050. So when you translate the state goals, when you translate the greenhouse gas emission goals, this is what we see at a system level in our service territory. Next slide. And this is almost the same slide, but for the solar. So the state goal also has a solar, it has a goal for how much energy is going to be generated via solar instead of traditional generation. And the Commonwealth, the state goal is for 6 gigawatts by 2045 and 9 gigawatts by 2050. This is solar generation. And what we've broken down here is how we see the system now and how we see in the future based on the solar that's currently in queue and the solar that we're forecasting for the future. So right now, as we sit in 2025, we have about 1.5, which is the dark there, currently installed in the queue, 1.5 gigawatts of solar. If you add everything that's in the queue, not installed, but in the queue, we're about 3 gigawatts system-wide for the solar. A lot of the new solar is actually coming to Western Mass. So the southeastern portion, SEMA basically, Massachusetts, that's saturated. A lot of, we already proposed a lot of what we call group SIP studies, in which we combined a group of DERs and developed the system to enable the DR that's there, future DR. But we're seeing a lot of DR now starting to grow in Western Mass. So a lot of the new in-queue DR is part of Western Mass. And the ESMP, the Electric Sector Modernization Plan, Chapter 6 goes over all the group studies and all the SIP projects that are proposed in Western Mass to enable solar. But going back to the figure here, we currently have in 2023 a hosting capacity of about, let's say, close to 4 gigawatts, right? And then if you combine all the projects that we have that are being proposed in the ESMP, That goes up to close to 6 gigawatts. That's the black line that you see there in the middle. But that doesn't get us to the state goal. If you look at 2050, the state goals, it's about 9 gigawatts. So it's not even close to the state goal. So a lot of work to be done there. It gets us to about 2045, but from 2045 to 2050, we're going to have to get creative. Maybe new technologies. That's what the two different green bars are showing. It's what can be done with other options, but that's where we have to get creative, because even with all what is being proposed right now, we don't meet the state goals of 9 gigawatts. Next one. So that was all of those were. Let me move something on my screen here. Okay. So all of those were state level slides, just to give you a good picture of how it looks at the upper level. But now let's talk individually. Let's start to focus on Western Mass. So as I mentioned before, these are the same numbers as before. So current number of substations. If you take the entire plan, the entire electric sector modernization plan, and summarize it basically for the different regions, right, especially Western Mass, this is what it would look like. It's 2 new stations and about 11 upgrades, so station upgrades. The incremental electrification capacity that's enabled is about close to 1 gigawatt, so 800 megawatts. And the DER hosting capacity from this proposed work is about 6 gigawatts. That will be an electrification capacity percent of 138%. But I'll cover later in the slide how this is a little bit misleading, because Western Mass is unique in the sense that you have, Springfield in the middle, and that's kind of the, your dense area. But then outside, it's a lot more rural, let's say, than if you compare it to Boston or even Southeastern Mass. Next slide. This is what those upgrades that we're mentioning look like. So, and I'll go in detail with this. So if you look at the right side first, the figures, in the S&P, we're proposing three categories here, right? So the gray is the substation upgrades that are required for capacity or reliability. The green is what we call the SIP DER project. These are the group studies, the SIP projects that were proposed previously that were already adjudicated, and then we're pending a decision on the DPU, but these are already submitted. So that's the Plainfield-Blandford group study. And then the orange are the new SIP projects that are proposed under this ESMP. And these are the areas where they are. So in Whately Deerfield, we have one big SIP project proposed there. That's an area where we're seeing a lot of DER growth. Also, Dalton, Hinsdale area, we're seeing a lot of DER growth there as well. And then down in Southwick and Agawam, those are the 2 additional areas where there's a lot of DER growth right now. So between, Dalton, Hinsdale, down to Plainfield, Southwick and Agawam, that's where we are seeing a lot of the DER growth. And then that area northeast on Whately Deerfield, considering our service territory. And as you can see, most of the growth, the actual load growth, is on your Springfield area. We have about 6 upgrades and 1 new station. So the new station is proposed in we call it Worthington Station. So that's between the Plainfield and Blandford area. That's the one shown between 2030 and 34. And then you can see the 6 upgrades. And then for the SIPs, that's also the timeline there. So the table on the left shows you the timeline for both capacity and DER-driven projects. Next slide. Okay. Another part that we did in this electric sector modernization plan was to give options, right? So this was actually asked by the GMAC. We were asked to present different scenarios. And there's actually, if you go to table 912 of the electric sector modernization plan in S&P, you have the scenario for Western Mass is there. But basically, we presented all the work required for one scenario, but we didn't stop there, right? So we included scenarios for what it would look like if you have full electrification, if you have some kind of hybrid demand response, or a high electric. What happens if it's more electrification? Second, I see something there in the middle. Is it me? Oh, yep, we're coming back. So, yeah, the person showing the screen, I'm seeing something different now. Hopefully yep, there you go. So we include different scenarios for electric vehicles, basically. And that's shown in that table there, different scenarios for energy efficiency. So that's all laid down in the electric sector modernization plan. And why these scenarios are helpful, because I showed you earlier, right? So we don't get there with all the proposed work, especially on the generation side. For Western Mass, we don't necessarily get there. So we're going to have to basically get creative, and maybe there's a scenario where there's more energy efficiency, or there's a scenario where there's more of a hybrid scenario instead of full electrification. So those are the kind of things that we have to play now and kind of analyze to see how we're going to meet the 2050 goal. Next. Okay, so this is a slide that shows how we see the entire Western Mass region in 2050. So, and I specifically brought this slide to make a point. So right now we have 1.3 gigawatts, let's say, of installed capacity in Western Mass out of in our service territory, right? If you take all the upgrades, the SIPs and the capacity upgrades, that gives us about, let's say, at 900 megawatts, 0.9 gigawatts of capacity, right? We see the peak in 2050 for the Western Mass region to 1.6 gigawatts, basically, if we count for the state goals. So if you just look at the numbers, you say, well, then Western Mass is okay. There's actually more than enough, because you have a surplus of 6 gigawatts, of 600 megawatts, right? 0.6 gigawatts. And the challenge with Western Mass is that 0.6 gigawatt is there because most of the upgrades, as you saw in the map, they're actually in the outskirts of the Springfield area, right? And those upgrades, at least right now, they're mostly driven to enable the DG that's currently queued up in those areas. Basically, those reinforcements will enable DG. But that 1.6 gigawatt, we're talking load, right? And where's the load in Western Mass? It's in your city areas, right? It's in your Pittsfield, it's in your Springfields. So we're going to have to do more study for the Western Mass, in subsequent years, and zone in where those needs are going to be for the cities, basically. Because the fact that is at a holistic level for Western Mass, the fact that there is a surplus of 600 megawatts, that just means there's a surplus because there's a surplus to connect the yard, but that doesn't mean there's a surplus for load. And that's where we're going to have to do more analysis and find out, well, where's that load going to come up? Because potentially more substations and more upgrades will be needed to basically enable that additional load. We still have some time. We have enough capacity, basically, and the electric sector modernization plan is every 5 years. We still have some time to kind of do that analysis, but that's what's next, basically, for the Western Mass region. It's where's that growth of load going to come up, and where's those upgrades are going to be needed to just basically for load growth, not necessarily for generation. And I'm not sure if we ask questions now or later, or if there's a question, but I think that's my last slide. Next one. We'll put Jacob next, I think. Yep. Go ahead, Jacob.
Sure. Thank you so much, Juan. I did see a question in the chat, so you might want to take a look at that while I get started, but I'm happy to get started. Okay. So my name is Jacob Lucas. I am the Director of Transmission System Planning at Eversource. And if we just jump to the next slide, there's a reason why we start with distribution when we give this presentation, and that is because When we think about the electric transmission system upgrades that are necessary to enable the electric sector modernization plan, and remember, by transmission, we're generally referring to electric system components that are at 100,000 volts and higher. So it's kind of, if you were to do the analogy, it's kind of like the interstate highway system of the transit system. So that's what the transmission system generally does. But what we've learned over the last few years, what we've seen happen over the last few years is it's not just the ESMP. There are many, many, many new factors that are happening on the distribution system that are triggering transmission system upgrades. So I have 4 key takeaways from my slide. This is one of them. Gone are the days where top-down transmission system planning is effective. It's not. There's too much happening on the transmission system, ESMP being one example. We are seeing many new single spot load interconnection requests in the tens to hundreds of megawatts in size seeking to interconnect to the transmission system. We also have the distributed energy resource effective system operators study. These are essentially just the transmission studies necessary to enable solar PV and the capital investment projects that Juan referred to earlier. These capital investment projects are also trying to enable solar PV, but we do them in groups. And these transmission studies for these solar PVs are looking at each one. They're looking at hundreds of megawatts of new solar PV resources. So bottom line is, over the past decade, transmission system planning usually has gone from top down, looking at like big regional zonal changes and transmission impact. But now it's bottoms up because so much is changing on the distribution system. Next slide, please. So if we look at quickly kind of the other main thing that the Eversource has modeled from a transmission. So the ESMP, I should clarify, the Electric Sector Modernization Plan, focuses on distribution system upgrades. There's a whole lot of reasons for that. I'm not going to get into them, jurisdictional and other things. But obviously, if we're making all these changes to the distribution system, at a minimum, you need to design and engineer the transmission upgrades at least to provide a source to these new stations. But we're actually learning now that we've run the transmission study for the SMP. It's actually much, much more than that. So really quickly, what the Eversource transmission system study for the SMP is looking at is the other half to this equation of decarbonizing, which is delivering the clean energy resources, right? Because the only way electrification works is if it's fed by clean resources. And you all probably know, but from the Massachusetts decarbonization roadmap has 30 plus gigawatts of offshore wind, dozens of gigawatts of solar PV. And so what the transmission study is modeling, it's delivering that new offshore wind and solar PV that no surprise, is not located where our current thermal generators are located, but delivering those new clean resources to the electrified load. And what we've seen is, this was one of the key takeaways, what we've seen is like no regret themes emerge. Because when you're looking this far out into the future, it's very, very hard to see what that would look like. But if you model enough different scenarios and you see themes emerge across all the scenarios, you kind of zero in on what we're referring to as no regrets solutions. ISO New England refers to these as high likelihood concerns. But essentially these the notion that really kind of regardless of what exactly, these types of transmission upgrades are going to be needed. So those are from our transmission study. Next, please. Is that importantly, we have identified, and many other transmission owners, not just Eversource, many new offshore wind points of interconnection on New England, especially along the South Coast. And this is focusing on the Martha's Vineyard lease areas. They're roughly 30 miles southwest of Martha's Vineyard. But we've already identified 13 gigawatts of landing points for these offshore wind farms. It exceeds all of the state's combined procurement authority. And we're trying to stay ahead of this, right? Because we need to be a solution provider and enable landing viable points of interconnection for these offshore wind farms. But we still are not at a point where we're seeing the need. If you're reading any of the trade press or whatever, like there's been talk about like offshore HVDC transmission network. We're nowhere near utilizing the existing available capacity of the network onshore. I just want to drive this point home because I just cannot emphasize how expensive an offshore transmission network would be. We're not there yet. We are absolutely not there yet. We've already seen 13 gigawatts, and this is along the South Coast. So where we've gone now is we're moving to the Gulf of Maine lease areas because those are probably going to come into Maine, Boston, South SEMA, Southeastern Mass, and we're identifying more and more points there. So the point is, we continue to identify viable points with very little onshore network upgrades to enable offshore wind. Okay, next slide, please. I just wanted to state, so I have a team that's working on Eversource's offshore wind joint venture with Ørsted. So we are literally on the front lines of enabling our nation's new industry. My team literally was on the South Fork Wind Project, which just announced last week. We've enabled all of the 12 wind turbines have been fully commissioned and energized, and it's our nation's first large-scale wind farm in federal waters. You've probably been hearing, though, that there's been some financial turmoil, and in the offshore wind industry in the United States, and I just wanted to touch on it quickly. So I highlight here up front that there have been 3 large projects in New England alone that have successfully taken the financial investment decision. So that means that these projects are proceeding regardless of whatever economic headwinds might happen. Those are South Fork, which is fully operational, interconnecting into the East Hamptons. That was fun on Long Island. But also the Vineyard Wind Farm that's interconnecting to Cape Cod in Massachusetts, and Revolution Wind, which is another Eversource project interconnected to King County in Rhode Island. But all 3 of these projects are moving forward. Now, yes, there have been projects that have requested renegotiation of their power purchase agreement. But if you look at the chart here, it really was inevitable because when they submitted their bids into the RFPs that they were awarded for, the secured overnight financial rate, which is just a common measure of borrowing money, essentially, it was much lower than where we are today, which unfortunately now where we are today is where major equipment is being manufactured that is very, very, very expensive. So yes, some contracts have been renegotiated. Sunrise Wind, which is nearly a 1 gigawatt project that Eversource is also involved with, just won its rebid. Yes, the levelized cost of energy for these projects has increased from what we originally thought it was. And this is where all of the headlines of the trade press has essentially been, United States offshore wind industry is in shambles. It's not that bad because we've seen indications. For example, I highlight one in Virginia with Dominion, where the coastal Virginia offshore wind project, massive project, 2,600 megawatts, bigger than anything we have in New England, has just filed with the state regulator to lower their levelized cost of energy, which must mean they believe they're going to be able to produce power for less than what they originally thought, down from $90 per megawatt hour, down to $77 per megawatt hour. So it's not all bad. And I'm just trying to provide a little bit of a sanity check to some of the headlines that I've seen in trade press, like it's a train wreck and the United States offshore wind industries in disaster. Okay, next slide. I just want to kind of close with my final point. So this is kind of my 4th big takeaway. and I try to emphasize this any chance that I can get. But I just want to say, and I hope I found a good analogy because I always struggle with driving this point home. But Massachusetts decarbonization roadmap across all scenarios identified the need to increase our intertie capacity with our neighboring regions. I cannot emphasize enough how important when you have a resource mix, generation resource mix, that is comprised so heavily of non-dispatchable renewable resources, how important it is to be able to share a diversity of load, but a diversity of generation with your neighbors. And so the California Independent System Operator is roughly a 50 gigawatt system. Juan previously was talking about Massachusetts numbers, but I'm going to zoom way out now. So all of New England, we're right now at a 25 gigawatt system, roughly, system peak, roughly, summer. We're going, most projections show us going to a 50 gigawatt system, maybe even higher, but roughly 50 gigawatts, so doubling all of New England's electric load. Conveniently, that's approximately where California Independent System Operator is right now, 50 gigawatts. And if you were to add up all of the transfer capability across all of the interconnecting transmission lines that California has with its neighbors, it's roughly 44 gigawatts. New England currently has 10. We are not even close. What does this mean? What does this translate to? This translates to potentially dumping and spilling a whole bunch of offshore wind that we pay to build, but we can't use because ISO New England currently has scenarios for all of New England to have a minimum load in the 500 megawatt range, right? Like, it's astonishing how low our minimum load is going. Why? Because we're building so much solar. The point is, we want to be able to use this renewable power that we're building. And another example is it can be economically beneficial. So the West realized this, and they built a whole energy imbalance market to be able to move this power on essentially like a 5-minute basis. The bottom line is, you can research this, you can Google this. It's called the Western Energy Imbalance Market. So just Google it. It's easy to find. They have a homepage that'll give you the benefits. Last year alone, this tie capacity benefited the West by $1.7 billion. It is massively economically beneficial, but unfortunately, New England cannot solve this. We keep having interregional projects that are proposed and fail. So it's very, very important. Happy to answer any questions, but now I'm going to turn over to Aaron Angstrom to talk about stakeholder engagement on the next slide. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jacob. All right, if we go to the next slide, can you tell that Juan and Jacob love what they do? So, and I love what I do, which is stakeholder engagement. So one of the key components of this plan, of course, is making sure that we are communicating not only with our municipalities, but also at the community level, to understand what each of our communities' priorities are. And many of the communities that we serve have their own goals. I know out in Western Mass, obviously, and we've heard this as part of the ES&P public hearings and public information sessions that we've held. DG and solar interconnection is a big focus for folks out in Western Mass. And we hear you loud and clear. Juan mentioned, as well as Jacob, so the pending SIP project, and this plan ultimately enables just even that much more interconnection. So ultimately, when we're doing our stakeholder outreach, we understand that without stakeholder buy-in, and stakeholders can range from developers, solar developers, to municipalities, to communities, to environmental justice advocates, to environmental advocates and climate advocates. The list goes on. But ultimately, we want to make sure we understand and we level set not only where we're coming from, but also understand, where our stakeholders are coming from. So we have a shared understanding. And then the next step would be to obviously then build on that shared understanding and develop trust. And ultimately making sure that we as Eversource and, as your electric provider, act on what it is that are your priorities and vice versa, making sure that we understand not only what your priorities are, but what our priorities are, and making sure that you understand our limitations. And, Juan went through a lot of what the system is going to need in terms of upgrades. And sometimes there are just physical and physics limitations in terms of where we can site some of this infrastructure or where we can build some of this infrastructure, because that infrastructure needs to go where the load is. Ultimately, though, we are going to make sure that each of our communities and each of our stakeholders have a tailored outreach approach, because each of their needs are going to be different and unique. So if we go to the next slide. So one of the things that we at Eversource, as well as the other distribution companies, fully recognize is that we're really good at planning. You heard from Juan, you heard from Jacob. We really understand our electric distribution system and our gas system, but ultimately we aren't experts necessarily in engagement. And certainly we have a lot of lessons learned from past projects, but we want to hear from those that are experts in this area, to develop basically a framework that we can apply to all of the projects, our large infrastructure projects. So we're developing a stakeholder advisory group amongst all National Grid, Unitil, and Eversource. And we're going to have different community-based organizations sit on that advisory group from across the Commonwealth. So they would represent not just Eastern Mass or Southeastern Mass. We want to make sure that they're representative of all of our territories. And that includes National Grid, of course, serves Western Mass as well. And so we want to make sure that there would be somebody that could speak on behalf of Western Mass. We want to make sure that, we're getting voices that not only just cover environmental justice advocates, but also potentially transportation, health, public health, low income. So we're developing a list of folks. Feel free to send us a list of folks that may want to potentially sit on this advisory group. So there's going to be 6 members from a community-based organization, and the 3 utilities, 1 person from each of the utilities, and then an equity and an environmental justice advocate. That's the other. These meetings we're going to have, they're going to be professionally facilitated. We want to bring everyone to the table to talk about the projects that we ultimately are going to need to build, but also understand what would be the best way to do outreach for these projects. What do communities want to hear? What do neighborhoods want to understand? What do developers and what do municipalities want from us in terms of engagement? How early should we be engaging with those communities? The unique part about this ES&P is that we've taken our plan that we've always had, but we've made it very transparent, and we've put it in a nice 700-page plan for all of you to read. So it's really light reading, very easy to understand, no worries. But ultimately, it's the first time that we've put it on paper and we've made it public. And so now that it is public, Juan showed you some maps of where things will need to go based on, basically backing into these states' clean energy policy and goals. So now that we've made it transparent, we now have to talk with all of you and make sure we understand when would you like us to start engaging. And certainly based on when Juan was explaining kind of when we're going to have that headroom and when that headroom is going to start to shrink. Once that starts to shrink and once we need to start putting our plans in place for either building another station or making upgrades to current stations, we want to engage as early as the communities would like us to make sure everyone understands kind of what the type of work that we're going to be doing, and making sure that we understand, could there potentially be additional benefits that we could provide to the communities as a result of hosting that infrastructure. So ultimately, that's it in a nutshell. I know we've ran past time, so I'm sure there are lots of questions for Juan and for Jacob, so I will turn it back over to Tom, but any questions, feel free to ask.
Thank you. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you all. Doug's got his hand up. We do have another question first, though, Doug. In chat, let's see if I can bring it up. Where's the chat? Oh, there it is. In chat, we had a question from David. Is growth driven by public Eversource or private development? How is any disproportionate development coordinated?
Could probably tackle that. So what we call load growth or growth and when we do our forecast, it consists of various things. So one of them is what we call base growth, which could be, a new house or a renovation of a building. Those are typically lower in size, but there are more of them basically. That's what we call base growth. There's also what we call step loads, and those are load additions of large customers. So think of your big commercial infrastructures, business growth, large developments. So those are what we call step loads. That's an additional way that we account for load growth. And then electric vehicles is also part of what we consider load growth when we do the forecast and estimate it for our plan. So depending on the area, it's a combination of some areas is basically the step loads. Some areas could be the electric vehicle in combination with the base load. So it's actually area dependent. So in your commercial areas, it will be the step loads because that's where the big buildings are coming up. In more residential areas, could be your base load because there's more development in terms of individual units. So that's what we consider growth, basically. I hope that answers the question.
David, was that what you're looking for?
Yeah, I guess we're just looking for. I've seen some in Dalton at least. There have been several projects that come up, and they've gone through some development phase, and they get to Eversource, and Eversource says, "Well, it's too big. We can't plug them in," and that some of the projects have died. Others have stalled and not restarted. We're not really quite sure how this all happens, how things are prioritized. Does Eversource guess where things are going to need to go, and if it doesn't quite happen in exactly that way, or geographically is different, then how do they deal with that kind of variance? If all the growth doesn't happen next to Springfield, if it happens in Dalton or in Athol or someplace else where they don't expect exactly what is a process or what goes on there, and how much notice do we get?
Yes, sorry. So I'm not too familiar with kind of the details, but what I can tell you is all of the new business or step loads, they come in through the same processes. They come in through the standard Eversource process. There's a separate department that actually takes care of applications, and then they get to a point where we have to do an analysis to see what is required for them to connect. Now, unfortunately, some areas of the system, they're not designed for large loads, right? Especially those residential areas. Mm-hmm. And, in order to connect a big load in there, so probably reinforcements, even substations or feeder reinforcements are required. And that will happen often in areas where the system is weak, and then we're trying to integrate a big step load in there. So that could be the scenario that you're describing, but in terms of the process, it's the same process. It's basically the customer applies, the engineering team does the analysis to see what's required. And sometimes that, what's required, it's not a small construction anymore, like a pole or a couple of wires. What's required is transmission, substation, and feeder work, because the system itself that is there is not designed for that. Now, the good thing actually, bringing it back to the SMP, actually. So the good thing with this entire electric sector modernization plan is, one of the goals of the plan is to build the system to enable the growth, basically. So we're trying to build it now ahead of time, so that if a large development does come in, let's say in the northeast area where it's not as populated, if that system has been already upgraded, it is a lot easier now for large customers to come in and connect. So that's one of the advantages of this entire electric sector modernization plan, that it allows us to present to the DPU what is required to upgrade the system to enable electrification. And with that, hopefully it takes care of a lot of those concerns of large customers that try to interconnect to weak systems.
And if I could add one, one of the things I think what we've learned as we've now that we have the ESMP, we're focusing on executing on the ESMP. And what we've quickly learned is it saturates certain aspects of the project development lifecycle. And so, David, to the question, it's like one of the things we're seeing is like, so we essentially have like standard transformer sizes, for example, right? And so there's a whole lot of reasons for that, spares and maintenance and other things. But like, so even to the extent that, and so now what we're doing is we're looking at our sourcing strategies, because these large power equipments, you're looking at 3-4 years to build and deliver. And so what it is we're looking at sourcing strategies like, okay, how do we now, instead of onesies, twosies, how do we buy these kind of in bulk, such that even if, it's not going to go over here in location A, but we can actually utilize that same piece of equipment because it's standardized over at location B instead, because that's where load growth that we didn't anticipate is actually materializing. We can do that. And so that's kind of another example of how, like, we're definitely looking at the entire life cycle and how we might be able to kind of be kind of smart about it. I hope that helps.
And Aaron's group would be the group to kind of get in that conversation where you guys are going to increase your capacity, and so we should be looking to develop in those areas. Is that correct, Aaron?
No, so yeah. Go ahead, Aaron. Start.
So I think if you are aware, so Juan mentioned that we have a whole nother group that kind of takes in these projects, and that's our account executives. And so they would be the ones that you'd be working with. They're external facing as well. And they would basically bring that information to system planning so that we know this is what kind of the large customer that wants to interconnect into the system, kind of what those requirements are. And system planning would work with them and engineering to kind of understand just how far along they are. And they would be the ones. But yes, we have dedicated account executives that would work with our larger customers.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's it. Thanks.
I would just like to say that we are well past our time, but I'd like to continue as long as the Eversource people can stand us. If anybody has to leave, please do. Doug, you had a question?
No, just an observation and a question. Eversource has kind of set a standard of under 10 kilowatts for home solar. There's not a cap, you can handle it, so on and so forth. Anything over 10 kilowatts, there are caps. I had to wait over a year to get hooked up at one point. I just like to point out that in a home in New England where we have air source heat pumps, a plug-in electric car, on-demand electric hot water, electric stove with a induction top and so on. It takes about 20 kW to run a home. So you may want to revisit expectations for what a home solar array is going to look like. It's kind of like bandwidth on broadband. 5 to 10 kilowatts looked like a lot, a decade ago, but anything under 10 kilowatts is not going to run a modern home. So you may want to look at raising that to 20 kilowatts as anything under 20 is kind of the norm.
Okay. Anyone else have any comments or questions? Okay, well, thank you very much. Thanks for your time and information, Mike and Juan, Jacob, Aaron. Appreciate it. We have a couple items left on our agenda. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all.
We still have an executive director's report. Tom, do you have anything to say on that?
Well, you really didn't get a written report, and I don't have
I'm
too
looking
much.
for a verbal one.
Yeah. Well, the only thing that I did want to mention is, and this is really for information, I've been alerting or notifying you where we get these requests for agricultural preservation restrictions, and they want the DAR wants a waiver of the 120-day notice requirement. And we got 2 of those in Sheffield. And I think this is all on the paper of a large, a farmland, couple of parcels that are going to go into the APR program. And then the other item that I did want to alert you all to is that in addition to the various plans that the Healy administration has already presented, such as the economic development plan, they're working on a housing plan, and coming up in the next several months, there'll be these same kind of listening sessions. I don't know if anyone went to either the municipal modernization bill listening session that was at the BIC or the economic development listening session that was at the BIC. There'll be another one of those. So specific to housing, I would encourage you when that's, I don't know if it's going to be at the BIC. They haven't set the locations of these. I'm hoping we can get one in Berkshire County. But that housing plan will really start to dictate a lot of the other activities that the Healy administration will be following through over the rest of the course of their tenure. So those were the 2 items that I wanted to bring to everyone's attention.
Any questions for Tom? Okay, we just have one more item on the agenda, and I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
To go. Oh, thanks, Doug.
I'll second it. It's Pedro.
Thank you, Pedro. We should take a vote. Kate?
Keith has given the okay. Thank you. No, anyway, Diana, are you still with us?
Yes. Yes, I am.
Thank you. Is that a yes for adjourning?
Yes, time to adjourn.
Peter?
Yes.
Pedro?
Yes.
Keith, we got you. Leanne?
Yes.
Buck?
Yes.
Terry?
Yes.
Christine?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Roger?
Yes.
Doug?
Yes.
Super.
Thank you. We
Thanks,
are adjourned
everybody.
at 8:49.